Hello, I'm Michael Magyar, and this is the Glass Studio on Cape Cod. We're gonna work on a wine glass today, and I blew a first bubble here. And then we're gonna put some, we call it the Sea Mix. It's half emerald and half cobalt blue mix that's in this bowl. And we're gonna blow a bubble and wrap my bubble with it. My assistants Billy behind you and Danny here are gonna assist me. You want a bubble wrap? Yeah. So now that's ready. Now we're gonna put on a bubble wrap. The furnace runs about 2150 Fahrenheit. It runs all the time. We never shut it off, except for when we need to change the crucible. You never think of glass as a corrosive material. At 2150 Fahrenheit, it is like acid, and it just eats away at the ceramic pot. So about every year and a half, we do turn off the furnace and change the crucible. So we call this a bubble wrap. It's an air bubble with color on there. Very quickly, I'm gonna make a little wave image, and that's kind of the motif of the Sea Bubble series. And you see now it's hard. I only have a few seconds to get that pattern right. Now we're gonna gather over this and blow a cup. This metal ring is just for centering that hot gather of glass. I have about 4 or 5 seconds to center that hot gather before my first little bubble gets hot and starts to move. So now that gather's all centered around my first bubble and all the color in the decoration. And people think you need big lungs to blow glass. It takes the slightest pressure when it's hot. So I'm just reheating it so the first bubble and my second gather of glass are more uniform temperature. And gravity is a huge tool that we use in glass blowing. You can see as holding it down, it gets longer. And that's one of the really big tools that we use when we're blowing glass. My assistant Danny is bench blowing for me, so I can inflate it and shape it. And that's a very typical Venetian technique to blow glass. Of course, I could blow it myself, but it requires me going back and forth, back and forth. So someone bench blowing is just a great tool to speed things up. Glass gets cold so quickly that you're always reheating it and maintaining the heat. And that's critical with this type of glass that we call soft glass, that if it gets cold once and I reheat it, it will crack and break. So I always have to maintain the glass to be basically always moving. If it's not moving, it's too cold. And I have a little caliper here that I can do my size with. And these are called jacks, probably invented by the Romans, who really started glass blowing about 2,000 years ago. And it's critical that I jack this little neck down, otherwise I won't be able to remove the piece. Double check my measurements. A little small, so I can make it a little larger. Again, I have to reheat it. And we don't really talk a lot when we're working because sometimes a lot of words will get confused, so we'll use a lot of sign language. By nodding my head, no, don't blow, blow. It's just a much easier way to communicate. Now, I have my size correct. And now we're gonna put a stem on the bubble. Billy's gonna gather a little bit of glass. And I'm gonna apply the stem right to the bottom of that bubble. And by turning the glass, turning the pipe on the bench, it allows me really easily to see if anything's off center. And then I always like to do a little splash image where that stem meets my cup. So just by spinning the pipe on the bench and holding my jack's handle real steady, I can center that stem very easily. I can pull that little bit of glass out to a stem. And when we're making sets, we're always measuring the piece to make sure it's the same size as all the others. That's about right. Now I'm going to put on a foot. And I have a little. So Danny there's going to bring me a gather of glass. As that stem gets stiff and cold, I can keep my bubble hot. I'm going to add a little bit of glass to the bottom of the stem. And again, the bench is, as I roll it, it's just going to help me center everything really nice. So with a wet piece of newspaper folded up, I can squeeze out a little foot on this. And it depends how fast I spin and how hard I squeeze, how big that foot is. And then this is a cherry wood paddle because it's a very good wood for glass making. It has very fine grain and very little sap. I can straighten that foot out perfect. Now I have a torch here. And that just keeps that cup a little warm. We call this a punty. And I'm going to attach it right to the bottom of that foot. And then as turning my pipe, I can see if it's off center, if it bounces up and down. So when I feel like it's perfect, right on center, double check, make sure my foot's really flat, double check my punty. Then I'll take a cold file very quickly, score that jack line, tap my pipe, and it breaks off. So now we're going to reheat the lip. As you see, it's just a broken edge, but there's a hole there. And this is what we're going to heat up and soften, and I'll be able to open my cup. And this probably goes back to how the Romans made glass 2,000 years ago. The Egyptians had glass 3,500 years ago, but they didn't blow it. They made little beads out of paste of glass and put them in a kiln and fired them and melted them. Or they would take a stick of clay, long pole probably, wrap glass around it and cool it, dig out the clay and have a little amulet bottle. So you can see I'm keeping my stem and my foot warm as I heat up that lip. Danny here is gonna paddle my lip to make sure it's nice and straight. And sometimes you only get 3 or 4 seconds to work something before it stiffens up. Again, trying to keep the whole thing nice and warm as I heat up that lip. So it's kind of interesting, when you're making glass, it's always moving on your pipe until you decide at the right moment that, okay, that's the size I want, that's the shape I want, and you let it get cold and it stops and it freezes. And that's a red wine glass. So very quickly, we take a sophisticated butter knife here, put a little stress on that punny, knock it right off, and that little sharp edge can be fired off very quickly. And very quickly, we're gonna get it right into the oven. The ovens are holding about 950 degrees. If we didn't put those in the oven and let them air cool, they wouldn't crack, they would explode because of so much stress. And it really determines on how thick the piece is, on how long it has to stay in the oven. Thank you.